Sioux culture revolved around war. Their pictographs, sort of autobiographies or tribal histories in picture form, make their love of battle obvious.
You see a grit and realism in the Native American pictographs that white artists would never embrace for another 100 years. Whites infused their images of Western warfare with a romance, with a light aura that glorified it. But the Indian pictographs show the horror of warfare, the torn and twisted bodies, the blood, the anguish that characterized warfare on the plains.
Going on the warpath was part of a rite of passage for males. War was the underlying principle of the Lakota people because through it, men gained prestige, and their prestige was reflected in the whole family honor.
In the mid-19th century, the new enemy that entered the Sioux's institutionalized, ritualized system of warfare was the white man. And in the space of a few decades, he brought to the plains numbers, technology, and tactics that the Sioux had never before encountered.
I think it was a case of too much hurry up, too much greed, and this belief in manifest destiny, where the people of European ancestry that was their God-given right to conquer this land.
On the northern plains, much of the land that the white man wanted was land that the Sioux had fought for during the previous century and now controlled. And often that land was speckled with gold. In 1863, a scout named John Bozeman blazed a trail to the gold mines around Virginia City, Montana.
This lay right through the Powder River country, the Buffalo Range of Red Cloud's people. And it was Red Cloud who personified, gave voice to the determination of those people to resist this invasion of their hunting grounds.
The white men have crowded the Indians back year by year. And now our last hunting ground, the home of the people, is to be taken from us. Our women and children will starve. But for my part, I prefer to die fighting than by starvation. Mach Pialuta, Red Cloud.
Red Cloud and his followers made travel on the Bozeman Trail difficult and dangerous for any whites who attempted it. So in 1866, he was invited to a peace council at Fort Laramie. As the council progressed, Red Cloud realized that Colonel Henry Carrington had been assigned to build a string of forts along the Bozeman Trail to protect travelers. The proud chief was incensed.
The Great Father sends us presents and wants us to sell him the road. Before the Indians say yes or no, White Chief goes with soldiers and steals the road. Red Cloud.
Red Cloud left the council in anger, along with about half the other chiefs. But some Sioux leaders, including the powerful Spotted Tail, stayed and signed the treaty. Carrington went on to build the forts. Red Cloud raided them. Red Cloud's war was on.
What has been done in my country, I did not want, did not ask for it. White people going through my country. When the white man comes in my country, he leaves a trail of blood behind him. Red Cloud.
William J. Fetterman was the brash young Army captain whose arrogance and ambition provided the prerequisites for the most dramatic incident in Red Cloud's war.
At Fort Phil Kearny was a Captain William Judd Fetterman, who had declared that with 80 men he could ride through the whole Sioux Nation, beginning a long tradition of American Army officers who had absolute contempt for their native foes. He got his chance when sent out to protect a wood detail that had been attacked by the Sioux.
Things were not quite as they seemed for Fetterman. The ragtag band of Sioux attackers that he chased deep into the hills were in fact a decoy party led by the brilliant young war chief, Crazy Horse. the leader of the small, apparently pathetic band of Sioux, suddenly shouted his war cry. Hundreds of Sioux materialized out of the trees and gullies surrounding the whites.
Fetterman and his second-in-command horrified the Sioux when, at the climax of the battle, they turned to each other and shot each other in the head.
In less than an hour, Fetterman and all his 80 men were dead. Red Cloud continued his raiding. The whites became anxious for peace. Red Cloud held his ground.
We are on the mountains, looking down on the soldiers in the forts. When we see the soldiers moving away and the forts abandoned, then I will come down and talk. Red Cloud.
In May of 1868, the Army did abandon the forts along the Bozeman Trail. The Indians burned them to the ground, and Red Cloud signed a momentous peace treaty at Fort Laramie that promised exclusive use of the Powder River country to the Indians.
When he signed, the Red Cloud War was over, the Great Sioux Reservation had been created, and while I'm sure Red Cloud didn't realize it, he had promised that ultimately all of his people would settle on the Great Sioux Reservation. As it turned out, he became the most noted of all of the reservation chiefs.
The Great Spirit has made all things that I have in my country wild. I have eyes. I see all you whites what you are doing, raising stock and so forth. I know I will have to come to that in a few years myself. It is good. Red Cloud.
Around the lands of the Sioux, with only the Army forts and a few scattered settlers to remind him of the white man, Red Cloud's confidence was unshakable. When asked about his 1868 victory over the U.S. government, his response was direct.
I have more soldiers than the Great Father, and he cannot take my lands against my will. Red Cloud.
But Red Cloud would travel east to Washington, D.C. 8 times in his years as a negotiator for the Sioux. During his first visit to the white seat of power, his worldview expanded in a way that compromised his bold confidence.
Our nation is melting away like the snow on the sides of the hills where the sun is warm. While your people are like the blades of grass in spring when the summer is coming. Red Cloud.
The government used the Washington visit successfully on waves of Sioux and other Native American authority figures. Since most Indian tribes didn't have any strict lines of command, the United States had to deal with many leaders and sometimes even created chiefs in order to have treaty signers.
The government couldn't understand why we had so many chiefs. They were trying to talk only to one leader that will speak for all the tribes, which is impossible to do because each one of us have our own bands or our own tribes to take care of.
They were wined and dined. They went to the Smithsonian institutions and marveled at George Catlin's Indian paintings. They went to the National Zoo where Gray Eagle tried to buy a monkey.
And they were also shown the might of America and Washington's intimidating architecture. Much of the intention of these trips was to turn war chiefs into peace chiefs.
A war chief was one who had won great war honors and who would lead by example in battle. A peace chief was a chief that was more dedicated to civil affairs, and by cajoling, by seeking compromise, by bringing people together, would influence the direction of the tribal life of a band of Lakota.
Red Cloud was ready to become a peace chief. He lived on the Great Sioux Reservation in areas so large that when it was created at the 1869 treaty at Fort Laramie, it encompassed the entire western half of South Dakota.